Welcome, everybody, and I know that we have a number of participants online. And we have 3 of our panelists online and 1 panelist here in person. So just before we step into hearing their introductions, I wanted to just very briefly say that we have a way for those of you who are in the room here to scan in case you wanted to register for the gift prize that comes at the end of the day. And for anyone who is online, we already have your name and email, so you will automatically be put into that draw. So I think what we'll just start with briefly is, I know it's going to seem counterintuitive because I think when I turn to look at you, you see the back of my head. So that's going to be really counterintuitive. But other than that, we're going to make it work. So I would love to just hear from you, your name, your role and the organization you work with, and maybe where you're calling in from too, so we can get a sense of where everybody is. Jonathon, why don't you get us started?
Hi there, everybody. My name is Jonathon. Pronouns are he and him, and I'm Director of Programs with NextGenMen. NextGenMen is an organization focusing on engaging boys and men in topics like mental health, healthy relationships, and gender equality, and finding effective entry points and bringing a strengths-based approach to our relationships with boys and men that we work with. My personal connection to it, I originated as an educator, but ever since I was a kid, and facing my own kind of gender-based violence, homophobic bullying, that kind of thing, I could have told you there's something unfair about what we get told we can and can't be as boys and young men. And I'm calling from Toronto, Ontario, traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Wendat First Nations. There's more to say about that, but I just thought I'd acknowledge I'm calling from a different part of the country. And I think I'll leave it at that and make space for the other panelists.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Jonathon. Rhiannon?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm a little bit under the weather, but my name is Rhiannon Wong. I am joining you today from Vancouver on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I work for Women's Shelters Canada, which is a national organization that supports women's shelters and transition houses across the country. The project that I work for is the Tech Safety Canada project, which focuses on building practical resources and training to help frontline workers support survivors who are experiencing tech-related abuse by their current or former partner.
Thank you so much. And am I correct that you're calling us here today from Vancouver? I know you mentioned the Indigenous territories, and I'm not sure everyone is as familiar with the Vancouver ones here in Nova Scotia. So if you don't mind just sharing where that is, we would love to hear it, and let us know.
I am calling from Vancouver in British Columbia, so thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're getting multiple provinces involved in dialogue here. Anita.
Hi there. My name is Anita Stewart, and I am the the Executive Director of the Antigonish Women's Resource Center and Sexual Assault Services. I'm calling in today from Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Our Women's Center has been in operation for almost 45 years in Antigonish, and I'm just grateful and thankful to be here today with all of you and as part of the panel.
Thank you so much. And Luc.
Hi, I'm Luc Cousineau. I am the Program Director of the Recreation Management Program here at Dalhousie University, teaching in the School of Health and Human Performance. I'm also the founder and the co-director of research for the Canadian Institute for Far Right Studies. And I do research now on misogyny online, and particularly we have a couple of projects we've just finished up talking to teachers about their experiences of online misogyny coming off of the internet and into their classrooms and other educational settings.
Thank you so much. So we'll jump into the questions, but I do encourage you to look up these fantastic people on our website, because we do have more fulsome bios, and each and every one of them is doing some really, really incredible work. So if you'd like to learn more about them, please do that. So the first question we have for today is if you could describe how you have seen online spaces increase exposure to misogyny that can lead to or promote gender-based violence. And please, if you have any notice of any new trends you wish to highlight, or feel or feel that might be just important aspects for people online and in the room to hear about. Maybe we'll start with you, Anita.
All right, excuse me. There is so much pressure for people of all ages but especially youth, to participate on online digital spaces, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, gaming. There's also sports betting apps. These platforms expose individuals to other people, other groups, influencers who they realistically would never have had the opportunity to interact with, except if it weren't for these platforms. With the increase of artificial intelligence and things like deep fakes, they're causing extreme harm. An online space can potentially provide protection for perpetrators who are not being held accountable for their misogyny or tech-facilitated violence they're perpetrating on their victims. There is a freedom, if you will, or an anonymity for individuals who are engaging in this harmful talk and behavior, like misogyny, racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia. And we can't look at misogyny without looking at intersectionality, especially when we're talking about gender-based violence. Online spaces can allow for people to track other people's locations. For example, Snapchat is a great example of that. I know personally, my children and I, we are in a Snapchat group and we share our locations with each other, but it's very clear that we don't share it to anyone other than ourselves in our group. So it's not all bad to share your location, but we need to be mindful of who we're sharing that location with. Some influencers and their platforms can reinforce negative thinking and harmful talk, which can result in echo chambers, allowing for misogynistic views to exacerbate. Some of the trends, interestingly enough, I was reading a study conducted out of the University of Toronto, Mississauga. It was quite an undertaking where social media and addiction were examined. The most consistent finding was that in people aged 18 to 24, half of the women were considered to be addicted to social media and their phones. So when we think of half of the women in a study, and it was quite a large group of women and men, think about that, all the information and all the content that they are being exposed to. It's overwhelming when you think about advertisements and all the, not that advertisements are all negative, of course, but there's a lot of pressure on not only young women, but also of all young pressures for all genders, really. So yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that. I'll give someone else a turn.
Thank you so much, Anita. Those are really great points, and I'm sure will be further added to by the rest of the panel. Jonathon, would you like to add to the conversation?
I can jump in. Thanks for getting us started, Anita. I really resonate with what you shared. And I had a chance to think about what do I want to contribute. Something that came to mind for me, two things. First of all is, maybe this is just very obvious to everyone, but sometimes I explain, for young people especially, and Anita kind of mentioned this already, but for young people especially, their lives are indelibly intertwined with the internet. The way I kind of think about it was, when I was young, we had our online lives, but they were distinct in a way that we would talk online about getting together in person, or we would take pictures in person in order to post them online. And today there's much more of a deeper integration with your identity, relationships, experiences, and communities with the internet. And I think that is part of what, at least that's how I talk about what Anita was mentioning about how young people, whether we call it addiction or centrality or integration, I think that that's part of what is going on there. And I think this is a bit of a different perspective, but something that I feel really strongly is that for boys to respect the boundaries of others, they need to experience the sensation of their own boundaries being respected. And so something that I would highlight in terms of sort of patterns and trends or exposure is that boys' initial experiences with things like gender-based violence, misogyny, objectification, or or derogatory language, like often that they're also victims in different contexts. So for example, we're probably mostly aware that like video game platforms online, especially competitive video games, can have a lot of hierarchy, toxicity, derogatory language, and slurs, and those are very normalized within those spaces. And I'm not mentioning that to just problematize video games, but just to mention that's, an element of exposure. Another one that I feel really strongly about is the prevalence of financial sextortion. There was a research report from a couple of years ago, sextortion being, I mean, it kind of speaks for itself, but the extortion of particularly young people, of their like sexual imagery online, basically blackmailing those young people. And there was a report from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that identified 90% of the victims they worked with were boys ages 13 to 17. And that's a really small demographic. So that's a real prevalent element of harm that boys are facing online. And then one more to highlight that, like, I don't know, I'll just highlight one more is the rising one is gambling. I just know that you can't watch a basketball game without seeing BetRivers, FanDuel, all the other betting platforms advertising, and those are also really prevalent online. They're targeting young people online in YouTube ads, TikTok ads, and that kind of thing. And the reason I mention these different elements of the potential for harm that boys are being exposed to is not to necessarily there's a direct link between gambling and like violence towards women or people of other genders, but just to say these are some of the pressures that boys are immersed in online, and those pressures are often transgressing their boundaries, whether it's through verbal language, whether it's through like a sexual experience or other kinds of victimization. And so just to highlight again that for boys to recognize, that somebody else's well-being matters and is important to respect, then they need to experience that themselves. And I think there's elements of the online world that put them in a unique position for the potential for harm. So that's my thought to contribute.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Appreciate that. Luc, would you like to go next?
Yeah, for me, I first of all, yes to those things, and I think what I can add is that our the data that's coming out, not just in Canada, our data, but also in other places in the world, is demonstrating that the young of the young people is much younger than we would have thought, especially in expressions of sexualized violence broadly understood in the classroom. And so we have reports both from our Canadian data and from our internet-based data that's reporting incidents with young people as young as 10 being the aggressors in situations. And that sort of sexual aggression, broadly defined, I'm using sort of broad terms to not take too long in my explanation, but this is stuff directed towards teachers, not towards other students most of the time. Sometimes yes, but I mean, we have teachers talking about things that have happened to them, and they're saying they are reporting kids as young as 10 in some instances being sort of the aggressors in those situations. And this is, clearly this is very problematic. It does a couple of things beyond sort of being very bad. One of them, and I think Jonathon talked importantly about this, and I'm going to sort of put words to it in a really specific way, is this is often something being done to boys as well as by them. And so while, a 10-year-old might be parroting language online, and there's a line there that we need to address in the sort of school system and also in sort of a broader social context, a 10-year-old doesn't learn to use sexualized language on a person of authority in their life who is women identifying without sort of external pressure, right? And so this is a thing sort of being done to boys in a really important way. And secondarily, and this is, I think, something really important that we don't talk about very much in Canada, is that we lack good quality internet use data for youth in this country. Most studies, including the Canadian Internet Use Survey, start at 16, which is, in our case, at least 6 years too late, because we have 10-year-olds who are exhibiting these behaviors in Canada, right? And they're likely not learning those behaviors at home, the kinds of behaviors we're seeing. My background before I started doing this education-based work is on online men's rights, red pill, and other misogynistic communities and pathways towards radicalization. One of the things we're seeing right now, and this is certainly on the really important radars of organizations like Public Safety Canada, the Canada Centre, talking about ideologically motivated violent extremism and nihilistic violent extremism. And I mean, I'm not going to get into the minutia of the difference of those two things, but how these pathways towards radicalization exist online, how kids in particular are pushed in them. The sextortion piece, Jonathon, is so important to both of these areas in really important ways. And also in the context of gender-based and gender-focused violence, also the predominance and the growth of the acronym is SHED communities, but self-harm eating disorder communities online, which affect boys but predominantly impact young women or women-identified folks. And so these are trends that are have existed for a long time, but are increasing over time, or at least the attention to them is increasing. And so we're seeing them in a more active way that I think are really important. These are some of the more extreme ends of things, right? When you're getting into nihilistic violent extremism, this is like really far on the spectrum, but those people get to there somehow. There are entry points, and that's the stuff that I'm really interested in, is those entry points. What allows entry into these communities, what starts these pathways of radicalization? Because it's important to study the people that commit violence or force violence on others, but it's, I think, equally or perhaps even more important to figure out how do people get into this at the beginning, because that's where it's much, much more easy to bring them out.
Thank you for shining the prevention lens on. I know that several of you have been speaking about that. Rhiannon.
I think for us, our work is a little bit different. We see online misogyny most clearly in how technology is being used by a current or former partner to harm or control a survivor. So it's not, for us, it's not necessarily about strangers online or friends groups. It's about, how digital tools extend domestic violence. We know that survivors are being threatened, they're being harassed, they're being monitored through their phones, their apps, and their social media, which keeps the abuse going and really reinforces that fear and that power and control, which is at the root of domestic or intimate partner violence. So for us, this kind of tech abuse is really rooted in misogyny, or the belief that an abusive partner believes that they're entitled to control the survivor's actions and access to information. And we found that it's incredibly common. In the end of 2023 into 2024, Women's Shelters Canada did a national survey of all the women's shelters across the country, and 95% of shelter workers had supported a survivor who'd experienced some type of tech-facilitated abuse, with harassment, threats, and location tracking being the three most common forms of tech abuse that folks are experiencing. So, it becomes a core part of gender-based violence today for us. We know that it's increasing within intimate relationships, and I think I'll leave it there for this piece.
Thank you so much, Rhiannon. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to have you on the panel was specifically for that lens. We were trying to get, and we did, I think, get you each have very unique lenses on this issue. And that's why this dialogue is so important, because it first of all, it highlights the complexity. You know, where do you even start? Do you start with prevention? And if you start with prevention, what happens to the people who are experiencing things now? So you have to do all of the things. And but understanding the how the situations that you're talking about, Rhiannon, and a lot of what you spoke about as well, Anita, are, you know, going into what Jonathon and Luc were speaking about, which is, how does this happen? How are young, we're talking about children and youth a lot, right? Like, this is coming up a lot. And so when we talk about children and youth, how are they being so influenced to create these kinds of scenarios that are so damaging to absolutely everyone involved? So we'll move on to another question. I do hope we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some audience questions as well. So the second question is really to, we've heard a bit about the challenges created by online misogyny. So we're looking at really what are some helpful strategies, programs, research, or initiatives that you've been involved in, borne witness to, or participated in that address or prevent or bring awareness to the harm caused by these types of digital environments that either are, you know, completely misogynist or are doing the work of recruitment and indoctrination for children and young people to create very confused and harmed young people. So how about we start with you, Jonathon, this time?
Yeah, something else you made me think of as well is that question of like why is this happening, or how, and that kind of thing. And another thought that I thought I would chime in with is a framework called the Circle of Courage, which this goes to an Indigenous way of knowing. It was initially shared by a Lakota researcher named Martin Brokenleg, identifying that there's 4 different core needs for young people as they develop into their flourishing selves. The first being the spirit of belonging, you know, that idea that like you're known and loved. The next being a spirit of independence. I'm sure a lot of us have seen that in young adolescents. Third being a spirit of mastery, like to actually become good at something. And the fourth being a spirit of generosity, right? And having purpose and giving back to your community and to the world. And so when I think about boys who are drawn to anti-feminist influencers and misogynistic spaces, I'm often thinking through this lens of the circle of courage and thinking about what they're accessing, right? They might be accessing that sense of belonging, right? Or a sense of independence. And what that also might cost them, in that you know, they might be losing that spirit of generosity to the world. And so this is not that specific, but when I think about like helpful strategies, you know, I think about if boys are bringing like online misogyny into the classroom, like they're clearly not experiencing that spirit of belonging in their school community. And so part of, I think, how we can address that harm in terms of primary prevention is to ensure that our existing communities and institutions, extracurricular activities like mentorship programs, that those are really feeding boys' core needs. Because it's really like, it's deleterious to think that they can get the expense of this. Like saying, you know, I'll be able to drink water, but I won't breathe oxygen. You know, they're core needs. And so if we're helping boys meet their needs, they won't have to look elsewhere to find them. And they'll be more resilient to, more resilient to those anti-feminist influencers and community sub-communities online. I guess beyond that, I would just highlight there is a growing network of nonprofit organizations, some funding bodies, not enough, truth be told, tech platforms, video game companies, government initiatives that are focusing on building the internet better, basically. And A lot of them are tracking the prevalence of misogyny online, which is intertwined with white supremacy, with anti-immigration rhetoric, with homophobia and transphobia. Like there's it's all mixed around in this same set of re-entrenching the status quo. And so there's organizations like NextGenMen, but we work with Ejimundo, Movember, the Boston Children's Hospital Digital Wellness Lab, the Christchurch Call Foundation's Project Catalyst, Young Futures. I just came across another funding opportunity from, it was called something about young something. I can't remember now. I wish I hadn't said that. But yeah, but what I'm getting at is that like, I'm excited about and energized by the idea of let's focus on building up what works and what is how do I say this, like justice and health oriented like online initiatives, rather than just coming down and saying there's too much screen time and like violence in video games and like and like the the pipeline and the all that kind of thing. To say it's not enough just to try to undermine and to deplatform the toxic stuff. We need to be promoting, supporting, and investing in healthy alternatives for young people online. And that's probably one of the things that I'm most excited about, is just that idea. One of the like coalitions is called the Inspired Internet Pledge, and that's kind of how I think about it. It's like let's be inspired about this, because that's what young people are looking for. And when they're given the chance, like we've seen this both within our own work, but also with partner organizations, when young people are given the chance, they're ready to dream about how to use this infrastructure that they've grown up with and leverage it for justice and for health. Yeah, and that's about boys' well-being as much as it's about the well-being and the safety of the people around them.
Thank you for that. It's so true. I mean, the internet has as many great opportunities as it does, I guess, horrifying ones, for lack of a better way of saying it. And it's about how do we harness that capacity for positive messaging and positive engagement for young people. And I briefly did some work in the Surrey area with some organizations that were working with boys who were entrenched in gangs. And that sense of belonging was the number one thing that kept coming up for every one of them. That they didn't have a sense of belonging at home. They never felt that was something that was part of their lives. And being part of that gang was the first time they felt a sense of belonging. So it is such an important piece. Thank you for that. Anita.
Thank you. For me, I think the biggest helpful strategy that I could think of is that we need to start having conversations about digital safety. These conversations need to happen with anyone and everyone that are engaging with online use. We need to discuss digital boundaries, and we need to be able to recognize the importance of having those digital boundaries. No different than we recognize the importance of emotional boundaries and physical boundaries. For example, people need to know that what it could mean to share your location on a Snapchat map. What are the implications of doing so? I'm not saying not to share your location, but we need to think about it, and we need to be mindful, and we need to understand what it means and what are the possible risks, if any. We have to look at maybe our own Facebook settings. I know I'm probably aging myself and dating myself here. What are we sharing widely, or are we sharing with just our friends? Where are settings set? It's so easy to go on a website and hit I agree, but what are you agreeing to? We have a couple of, I think, wins, hopefully, in our center here in Antigonish. One that I'm probably most proud of is our program called Healthy Relationships for Youth. So that is a school-based peer-to-peer facilitated model program that consists of 10 modules. And within those 10 modules, we do have a module that's dedicated to technology, more specifically social media and healthy relationships. And things that are covered, I just did a quick list because I wouldn't remember all of them. We encourage students to think about their digital boundaries and remind students that everybody's boundaries are different. That's extremely important. The pros and cons of social media, define tech-facilitated violence and tech-facilitated sexual violence, human trafficking via social media, discuss the harms of AI, internet safety. Social media has exacerbated social comparison ads in entertainment in the entertainment industry. Tips to limit our social media exposure. Understand that social media can be an addiction, and discuss fake news and ways to spot it. So maybe I'll leave it there. Actually, I would like to add one more thing. Just going to the challenges that we are finding seems to be a bit of a trend as well. So I should have mentioned it earlier, but we're noting that one of the most challenging situations we're seeing is that social media is now being commonly used for luring and promoting and grooming potential victims of human trafficking, especially our youth. The results of human trafficking in Nova Scotia are astronomical, and our Indigenous people are being disproportionately affected by that. I would like to point out, however, here in Nova Scotia, we do have the Intimate Images and Cyber Protection Act. So from their website, it states that if a person has been bullied online or had intimate pictures shared without the individual's consent, the victim is protected under the law. I think that's fabulous. But I think we also need to go a step further with policies and regulations. How do we do that? Not quite sure. I don't have all the answers, but we certainly need to take a hard look at that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita. Appreciate that. Luc?
Yeah, I think before I start talking about programs, I want to circle back to something Rhiannon said in her last comments. And I think that it's really, really important for us to be thinking about the work, the really excellent work that Jonathon and NextGenMen are doing, for example, addressing sort of men and boys in particular. The behaviors that Rhiannon's talking about, these really deeply problematic behaviors, are learned behaviors. And so while we're addressing two different parts of a system, we're certainly working on the same system. And that's I mean, it's a way that I sort of see it, because I think that, you know, when boys get to be my age, at some point they'll have learned that that's an acceptable behavior and it's not. And so where do they learn that? And I think that that's really important, because it is easiest. I mean, I'm an academic, right? We specialize in specialization, right? And it is a wrong-headed way from an academic perspective, and this is especially true in academics, for us to sort of hyper-focus on a thing. I don't mean, I'm sort of, my brain is like, oh, are you saying that that's what Rhiannon said? And that's not what I mean to imply, but that's what I got thinking when you were saying that, is that I see the work that I do in a lot of these organizations I might talk about here in a second as doing the same work. And I think that your version of that is way harder, because you've got to undo learned behaviors or work against learned behaviors in adults, which is tough. I think Jonathon is being too modest. The work that NextGenMen does in this area is essential. I agree that there's not enough funding for these projects more broadly, but so I mean, kudos to him for being so selfless in his description of good programs. I'm also involved in the Catalyst initiative out of the Christchurch Call, which comes out of New Zealand, has done really excellent work across a variety of areas, and this initiative is particularly focused on these issues, and so I think that has really good potential. Here in Nova Scotia, we have Guys Work, which is doing really, really excellent work here in Nova Scotia, and if you're not familiar with Guys Work, look it up, because they're doing excellent stuff. In New Zealand, there's a great researcher who has unfortunately moved away from academia, but he's doing therapy work now, counseling work with men and boys, named Chris Taylor, who his work previously was to go into schools and do just essentially chats with young men about masculinity. And the output of that was that he would get calls from teachers 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after his session saying, the kids ask me every day when their next chance to just talk about what it means to be a man or a boy is going to be with Dr. Taylor, right? And that's really been really indicative. I got to do some work there with him, and it's been really indicative for me about like sometimes how simple, I mean, it's hard to run those things, but on its face, that kind of program is really very simple, providing an opportunity for us to talk about it. And that's where I think that Jonathon is being too modest and not saying, hey, we're doing good work over here. There are we're starting to get connections for this through really important larger organizations like teachers unions, for example. And so teachers unions in Ontario, like the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, is starting to key in on this and starting to provide programming. I think there's a real opportunity with teachers unions. I mean, I'm most familiar with the Ontario context, but the teachers unions in Ontario are so incredibly powerful that if they want something integrated, if we want something integrated into curriculum, the best pathway is through teachers unions, because they have an incredible amount of power to shape policy. And policy is a thing that we need. And alongside that, school boards. There are some school boards like the TDSB in Toronto. I split my time between here and Ontario, and I grew up in Ontario, so I'm more familiar with the context there. But the TDSB has integrated into their code of conduct mentions of sexualized violence and gender-based violence in their code of conduct, and therefore enshrined in policy in a way that's important. Does that always get implemented or enforced? Absolutely not. There's a real miss there, but it at least exists in the policy. And I want to build off of, just really briefly, when we talk about digital literacy, when we talk about these things that are about the individual, I think we miss the role that we have to play socially and policy-wise and legislatively on platforms. Because if you can, for example, be the CEO of Roblox, and if you have kids who play Roblox, pay attention real quick. If you can be the CEO of Roblox and you can say on the record, well, there's pathways to extremism on my platform, and there's not anything I can do about it, which is just factually untrue. There's absolutely things they can do about it, but they won't. That's what's reading between the lines there. Then we need to be thinking much harder about what is the social and legal and policy role that we need to play in order to protect ourselves, our children, and each other from these platforms. All of the tech platforms that we use pretty much are private businesses in this to make money. What makes money on social media? Keeping eyeballs on. And so if we're only willing to tell people they have to be better, and we're not willing to tell private companies that they have to be better if they want to operate in this country, then we will always fail. Always, always, always. And if we don't start thinking that way, we're euchred.
Thank you for that. I wish I had an hour with each one of you, honestly. There's so much more to say on like each of the lenses that you are providing here, and I think that certainly one of the reasons we wanted to have this particular panel makeup is there has been there were a lot of years where gender-based violence was a woman's issue, and that was all it was ever seen as. And when it was a women's issue, it meant trying to repair the women who had been, already been victims of this. So we need to recognize that we have to come at this from all angles, and we have to help the young people who are really, again, when you look at the ones that Rhiannon is talking about, like, how did they get there? How did they get there? And what do we need to do to change that path? So I really have appreciated each of your perspectives. I wanted to check with the room and with our people online to see if anybody had any questions specifically for any one of the panelists or for all. Yes.
Thank you so much, everybody. The conversation today have raised a lot of things I've been feeling all day around online access and what does online access mean in this very polarized, deeply sensational, deeply oppressive times that we live in right now. Always have, but particularly now because of our technological access. So when I even think about this forum, I look at it, I think it could be gender-based violence addressing online misogyny. It could also really feels like to me is gender-based violence addressing patriarchy, of getting really clear on that and how patriarchy has harmed men and particularly young boys that are growing up with deep trauma that is washed and rinsed and rinsed and rinsed, and right now is a deeply popular and culturally significant movement. It is like a really harmful patriarchy. And that feels, I think we've all, like everyone has been speaking to this in different ways. I'm curious, thinking about the different sentiments, if we need different angles, we need to specifically have like, you know, spaces here, we need to have affinity groups or like men are speaking with men, we need so much more than that. I'm curious for all the panelists, if there are examples in your work where you have either, it's kind of, I have two questions, answer what you want. First, I'm curious about cross-cultural solidarity work, how that's existed in your orgs, if at all. It's understandable that there may be some orgs that are like, you know, exclusive for particular safety, confidentiality, maybe it's exclusively women, but maybe for some of your work, I'm curious where you have seen or hope to see examples of addressing patriarchy with various genders working together in some kind of structure. That's one piece. And the other piece I have is from maybe an extension of that first question. If we're thinking about policy, could folks on the panel maybe think about an example or two of policy development that is addressing patriarchy that they, or like, as opposed to addressing a response to patriarchy, like we're gonna have funding for women's shelters, great, but is there policy, or what policy exists around the power dynamic of patriarchy? And if at all, I'm just curious in like an acute, tangible sense, things for us to think about in that way, because it's hopeful to see some examples that is like centered, addressing patriarchy primarily rather than responding. And I know there's folks on this panel who are doing that work, so I'm very curious to see what might exist there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I will see who wants to maybe answer that first, and you can feel free to pick one of those to address if there's something that you would like to speak to with that. I think it can't be, you know, it's incredibly obvious that we are living in a world where the most powerful country in the world has a president who is really a good example of that, and that is having spillover effects in our country as well. So this is a very prevalent issue right now. So who would like to answer that? Anyone?
I can jump in.
Oh, Anita or Jonathan?
Anita, what do you prefer? Okay, I'll start.
We're gonna have a nice fight because we're Canadian now. We're all gonna be like, no, you go. Yeah.
An example of that cross-cultural work. Super interesting. So I basically rewind the clock, and all NextGenMen had ever done was in-person school-based programming, mostly with grade 7 and grade 8 boys in one school at a time. And then you may remember a particular springtime of 2020 when all schools closed. And we still have this mission of supporting boys' well-being and positive development and challenging gender-based violence. And that brought us into the online sphere. And boys told us we're on Discord. And so now fast forward 5 years, you know, this Discord community, which is called NGM Alliance, is basically develop, like we're in the midst of refining our expertise and defining resources for other youth serving nonprofits to work with young people to build safe and effective community, to support them in their own communities. And we've seen almost 800,000 messages in our Discord server over 5 years. And there's, just last night, actually last night was so sweet. One of my staff was reading bedtime storybooks, like picture books, to a group of high schoolers. It was just, the like antithesis of this like hyper masculine, competitive, misogynist, set of expectations for when we typically think about teenage boys online. And anyways, it's just been a really neat corner of the internet. And to speak specifically about countercultural, like that countercultural or cross-cultural solidarity, I'll be honest with you, that's been challenging. I have seen boys learn and develop empathy and solidarity with people who are different from them. I had a kid, a kid has told, we did an evaluation piece over the last year, and one of our teenagers described, he's like, I entered the space carrying a lot of homophobia, and I met someone who was actually gay, and I realized he's pretty normal. He's like, just like me, and I don't have anything against him, and so there's been that increased awareness of, an urban kid, developing a relationship with a rural kid, or a white kid developing a relationship with a kid who's new to Canada, and so on and so forth. The challenge has been the polarization that we're seeing in our culture, both in Canada and the United States. I've been seeing in this online community, that sometimes it feels like what I'm seeing with these youth when they disagree, especially with things that are politicized, it feels like everything's on the line. Whether it's about trans exclusion in sports, or it's about Trump and Elon Musk, or Palestine and Israel, there's a real sense that like their own lives are at stake and they can't back down and they need to prove their point. And I think one of the most like powerful things anybody could ever say is, I never thought about it like that. Thanks for sharing. But what I often see is this like digging in the heels and and that pushing away. So, and that's just being transparent. Like, again, overall, the Discord server, which if you're interested in, it's for boys in middle school and high school, and it's free and freely available. You can find out more about it at nextgenmen.ca/alliance. But so overall, it's a positive space, but just being transparent, that cross-cultural solidarity, like we're seeing polarization, and we're seeing that in all different facets in our society. And and then I kind of got stuck on this policy question of what does it look like to actually address patriarchy rather than just the response to patriarchal harm, basically. I was up at 6:30 maybe that's not that early for other people, but I was up at 6:30 this morning and then facilitated 2 sessions this morning. So I think my brain hit a wall, but one thing that I thought, okay, I could just put this out there is Movember and Equimundo, whom I previously mentioned, have an initiative that's just getting off the ground right now called the Young Men and Media Collective. And their goal with this is to promote that like alternative narrative, to promote something alternative to the idea that to be a man means to be relentlessly rich and ripped. That's their like catchphrase. And so promote those positive influencers, those healthy communities, and those alternative messages. And so I'm excited to see where that goes. But yeah, other than that, I kind of hit a wall in terms of what does that look like on a policy level. So I'm excited to hear what other people have to share.
Thank you, Jonathon. Anita?
Yeah, the same, Jonathon. The patriarchy and policy, that's a challenging one for me for sure. I don't know that I'm going to take a try at that one just yet. I feel it's really important for our youth to have spaces of their own to, get to know one another, get to know themselves. I know there are gendered programs, for example, we have Guys Work here in Nova Scotia doing great work. And then we have our Healthy Relationships for Youth program, which is for all genders coming together. And I think there's a place for both programs, and both are so important. I think it's important for all youth and of all genders to come together and try and problem solve. And I can only speak to our program with Healthy Relationships for Youth. That's something that we pride ourselves on. How do we work together in the society together at all genders? all-inclusive. So that was one of the first points I wanted to make. I think programming is also very important, especially individuals who are marginalized. We just received a grant from the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia to do what's called the Inspire program, and that will be run in our local Indigenous community of Buknakak for young girls, and it's about empowering them. We've also just finished up a program with a mentorship program for young African Nova Scotian youth here in Antigonish and Guysborough, and which is extremely important and was extremely powerful. And I won't get into all the findings and all the fun things that happened and what came out of that, but I think it's important. And from my lens, and I'm quite a bit older maybe than some on the panel, it's chipping away. It's just continuing to dig down and do that work. And if we show up with the right intentions, I've often been accused of being Pollyanna with my attitude and just being extremely hopeful and working together and just chipping away and just doing the work and getting the work done together. So not to sound too Pollyanna.
Thank you, Anita. We need Pollyannas in the world. Yeah, I think those are all really great points. And I think too, it's, I can't remember what the saying is, but it's like, don't let perfect get in the way of good or something along those lines. And I think sometimes we can feel like, but we're not doing everything. And so then you get paralyzed and don't do anything. And so I think I liked what you said, where you just spoke to the fact of like, there's room for both of these. There's room for the mixed gender groups. There's room for the gender specific groups. So I think that's a good point too, I think, to add to that equation. I know that Rhiannon and Luc have not spoken to this. I saw that we had an online question. I don't know if you're able to see that. I just saw it pop up here, so I haven't, no? No, they can't actually, no. Okay, so all right, well, in the meantime, Rhiannon or Luc, do either of you want to answer that, or we could see if there's another question anywhere?
I was
She's
just going to
coughing.
say,
She's coughing right now.
Oh, she's coughing right now. I was just going to say, I would love to hear from you on this if you've got something there, but
Other than your cold.
yeah, other than a cough.
I really enjoy this because it means I'm not getting your cold as I'm talking to you here. So I appreciate the virtual world for this. Rhiannon, did you want to add anything to the conversation if you can catch your breath?
Yeah, sorry. I think that, like with Women's Shelters Canada, we're in a position, we're a national organization, so been working on some policies, but also working with some corporations to try to influence different policies within different platforms and corporations. We, are able to connect with the Apple Trust and Safety team and test some of their safety products. We're working with Interact to ensure that it is harder for abusive partners to misuse the messaging feature within the e-transfer platform for harassment and threats. And so I think that that may answer the question that's in this chat here, but we are working slowly and to get as much buy-in as we can. We're often getting asked to be part of these safety committees and these international working groups against stalkerware with all of the different antivirus platforms and things like that. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to make some change. It's just, again, it comes down to funding. I'm only 3 days a week for this big National Tech Safety Canada project. And so, we rely on our partners a lot to help out and push the agenda forward.
I'll just say quickly on the policy question is that when we're thinking about how does policy address sort of a larger social issue like patriarchy, the question we have to ask is like, what does that address? And patriarchy is a move to power that is upheld by the people that have power right now. And so it is, I mean, these folks had sort of a little bit happier things to say about it than I do, but I don't, at least in the format that we have right now, I don't see a lot of moves to like truly address that as a power structure, because it's a power structure that upholds the people that currently have power, and that's a really problematic situation. But I agree, like if the policy only attacks symptoms, then can we ever really get better, right?
Thank you so much to each and every one of you. That's pretty much our time for today. So I just wanted to give a round of applause. I don't know how well you'll hear it, but they're clapping for our amazing panelists and the perspectives that you have been able to provide today. Really, really appreciate each and every one of you have been able to really add a lot to this conversation. I wanted to also thank all of you who did come, who are here in person and here online, and that one of you has won a $250 gift card. I don't know which one of you yet, and hopefully you all were able to either scan that or if you're online, we already have your name. So that's an extra perk that you get, and I don't think it applies to the panelists, unfortunately. I'm sorry. But this is a conversation that is not going anywhere quickly. We certainly have a whole lot of work to do, and thank you for all the work that you do, and for everybody else being willing to be part of the conversation. So thank you again, everybody, and four panelists, 4 parts of the country, so we appreciate all of you being able to participate, and this is an example of one of the good things that can come from the virtual world, is we're all able to have this conversation. So thank you so much, everybody, and that's it for this session. Thank you again.